And the first night that we hung out, he actually introduced me to methamphetamine.
Yeah.
I was 15 in 3 months
Yeah.
when I did ice for the first time. It seemed to be back to picture perfect while I was black and blue and bleeding. There were moments where I genuinely thought that my life was going to be taken from me at his hands.
Yeah.
Fast cars, like all this crap happening, penthouse suites. And I was 17 and I had like endless money and drugs, and they arrested me for quite a substantial amount of meth and a heap of cash. Like, this is pathetic. Like, this is ridiculous. This isn't how I want my life to look. Okay, nope. We're out. My bounce back game is strong as fuck. Like, you cannot deny that with me.
I need to know to get to where I want to go. Hi, Angie. Welcome to the Feck It No More show. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Glenn. I'm
really excited for this discussion today, Angie. I came across your content a few months back, and I know that there was definitely a Feck It No More moment behind it, and I'm excited to get into that today with you. Do you want to introduce yourself to our listeners and our community?
Yes, absolutely. Firstly, thank you for having me. I was pleasantly surprised when you reached out for me to come on the podcast. I actually host my own podcast called Entrepreneur Audacity. So, when the host becomes the interviewee, it's quite a nice dynamic, nice shift. So that's been really cool. To our listeners, my name is Angie Verzeletti. I am a confidence coach and leadership coach. I have my own business called Audacity Health. I host a podcast called Entrepreneur Audacity, and I have had many Feck It No More moments that we are definitely going to strip back. I promise you that. It's been a few.
That's excellent. And I suppose for me, Angie, it's that transformation part that really stood out for me. Your life before what you're doing now. But I suppose I want to take you back to the very beginning. What does life look like before that kind of first Feck It No More moment? What does your life look like? What age were you living? What's the surroundings like?
Well, I'll paint the picture just a little bit more to give you a bit more detail on where I'm at now. So, I've got a global podcast, got businesses, I do partnerships with people all around the world, and I travel a lot. I'm very confident on camera. I've written a book. I've done a lot of great things, a lot of big things, right? Had a very successful career in mining, corporate business, done all the climbing of the ladders and all that crap. But if we hit pause then and go back to let's go back to when I was 15, because that's kind of when I was in that turbulent time in my life, right? So I've come from a very good family. Like, my parents are absolute legends. No shortage of love or anything like that. And I was just a rebellious teen. I was, chasing freedom and dopamine and just wanting excitement. And, my parents were always having so much fun, and I felt really restricted. And I was a bit like, what is school? School felt pointless to me because, I was always really smart, so when I was at school, I was always the person that was finishing before everyone else. And I was kind of, spent a lot of my time sat there, like, waiting for everyone to catch up so we could go. And it was almost like, why am I here? What am I doing? So, I was rebelling, and then I was wagging school, and then I started running away from home. And then I took a complete left hook, and I met this guy who ended up being like the worst, one of the worst and one of the best things that's ever happened to me, because the lessons that I've learned from that, which we will definitely get into, have been pivotal in my life. However, at that point, I was smoking dope, smoking ciggies, drinking, like all the underage stuff, thinking you're hell cool. And I met this guy, typical bad boy. For me, that was really exciting. And I was like, really quite mesmerized by this dude, whatever you want to call him. And the first night that we hung out, he actually introduced me to methamphetamine. And I'd been 15 I calculated this because I've gone through, because I needed to write it out for the book. But I was 15 in 3 months when I did ice for the first time. So that was the complete left hook of where my life was, it was rocky, and then it just went fucking downhill.
Really, really quick. We need your help to reach more people. We are finding the guests. People are coming on to share their story, and we need to get their message out to people who may be currently in that moment and needing to hear it. And I can't do that without you. Please hit that follow or subscribe button. The like button or the love button really helps us out. Most powerful is to leave a comment to say that you've either enjoyed the show, what you've taken away from it, what stood out for you, how it relates to your life, what you think other people would be able to get from this show. Things like that really do help us grow and make meaningful impact to other people's lives. I'll let you get back to the show.
So from that, I ended up, the first few kind of months with him was great. It seemed really exciting. Like he was doing all the stuff we were really in love. There was that, because he was a bit older, there was a bit of friction with that because I was so young, and, he was just like, oh, we can't really be together, like, rah, rah, but we couldn't stay away from each other.
Yeah.
So then it just ended up being like this relationship. And I think maybe within like the 6-month mark within that period is when he started physically abusing me. And, because he was really high on methamphetamine, then not getting any sleep, psychosis, like all of this stuff was happening. And I was this young girl who was in love with this man that, and I thought that was what love was at that point. So it was crippling to me, right? And I latched on to this relationship because I genuinely thought that's what I deserved, and the way he was to me after like the abuse and everything, it seemed to be back to picture perfect while I was black and blue and bleeding. So, it all went downhill from there. And then what kind of transpired from that was a couple of years of abuse, heavy use of methamphetamine and just about every other drug. I was selling all the drugs, and, I was getting introduced in this lifestyle that he was in and failing in quite drastically because he was addicted to this substance. So, I'm sure your listeners will understand the process of, sell to support your habit kind of thing.
Can I ask, Angie, because I've done a couple of chats with people who have went down the ICE kind of route, right? And the impacts that it had in their life. Can I ask, what's them first few times that you've took ICE? What does that feel like for you? At 15 and 3 months, just taking ICE for the first time. What does that feel like for you at that point?
Good question. So, and interesting, right? This might, it's just interesting because I reflect a lot, right? And for me, I feel like I was using the drug quite a lot.
Yeah.
And I never got to the point of, being like fully addicted to that drug specifically, because I really feel like it didn't have, it kept me awake. I was alert on it. It was kind of like, I almost felt calmer.
Okay.
When I took it.
Yeah.
Now you fast forward to when I was 25 and I got diagnosed with ADHD.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Dexamphetamine.
Yeah.
So for me, I've kind of been like, oh, okay, maybe I was, it was a way almost a self-medicating kind of situation because, I was handing in some of my best, and I mean like A+ assignments when I was high on ice, which is just ridiculous, So, and I've got a bit of bias because of that. Like it wasn't the whole anticipation around it. Like, the excitement and everything was there. But for me, I think the thing that was the most exciting was him and the lifestyle and that the novelty of, oh, this is dangerous and this is really naughty. Like, what are we doing here? Like, that was really stimulating.
That was more
for me.
the buzz.
But the drug itself, it was kind of like, oh yeah, like it just makes me work better,
I'm glad I asked that because the previous two guests were very much along the lines of they knew as soon as they took it, this was going to take them on a roller coaster because they had totally transformed internally in their own mind. It would made them a lot more outgoing and things like that. It's good to hear a different perspective on that for our guests, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You talk about being caught up and probably more of the buzz coming from the bad boy and the lifestyle that come along with that. Tell us a little bit more about that.
That was the thing when other people had taken the drug wasn't the thing, it was him. And I knew that was going to be my unraveling. But to the extent that it was going to unravel me, I didn't really realize.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, he was using drugs, like he was using ice, he was selling a lot of it. And he was, in my opinion, a very shit drug dealer because he owed a lot of people money and it was a very easy way to make money. It was a very easy way to make money. And he just was performing in such a low level of it that it was a bit, I was still young and I've always been like quite cluey and quite, like somewhat smart, if you will. But I found it just a bit annoying that he was very bad at, making more money from it. And then when I finally, and this was one of the many fuck it no more moments when I finally actually had the courage to leave him. And I decided that I was going to beat him at his own game because I just was sat there and I was like, oh, this guy has not, for something that is really easy to make, money on. And so then I ended up doing that and, that being driven by such a, because there was a lot of, the relationship between us was very toxic. It was a lot of abuse. So I had a chip on my shoulder, or like a growth, if you will. That was like there fueling me to just completely show him up in all ways. And I did.
Where did that chip come from? In your own words, tell us what that period of your life looked like with him. And how long did that go on for?
It was a couple of years. It was a couple of years. And it was ins and outs. And, bear with me because a lot of this stuff has actually, like, I'm very patchy on the memory.
Sure.
And some of the stuff I just can't remember from the PTSD element that I was kind of left with. So, and I didn't realize all of that had occurred until after
left the impact.
Seeing a psychiatrist, and we'll get into all that. But what it was like was, it was almost cinematic. I felt like I was in a movie.
Yeah.
We were making all this money. It was exciting. Like things were happening. Like really important people were around us. And, he was like, oh, we're going here, but like, don't say anything. And then, like he put me on this pedestal. But then at this, around people, I was like, like on this pedestal with him. But then as soon as closed doors happened, he was, like, oh, you're flirting with everyone, you're cheating on me, like you're doing all of this, you're telling the cops on me. And so he was so driven by paranoia that it was really unsafe, but then safe.
Yeah.
So, and this is, if you look at a lot of people, they feel like safe with their abuser. It's essentially what it boiled down to. It was, I wasn't physically safe. There were moments where I genuinely thought that my life was going to be taken from me at his hands.
Yeah.
Nearly did. And from all of that, like, even though that was going on, it was still for me, like I felt that was the person that I could trust and be around and I was safe with him, and even as ridiculous as this sounds, there's even still that little part of me that does still feel like that is a true fact. And it's like, hang on a second, this guy broke your jaw out of place. Like you were not safe with him. But you do have this, and it's all like the psychological warfare that you go through with someone who's narcissistic and manipulative, and you get tied into that, and then you throw, ice-induced paranoia and everything, and on top of it, it spirals everything.
Were you with them long before the domestic violence started?
It's probably around, I want to say like in between like the 4 or 6 month period is when it started.
Okay, so it was quite early still.
Yeah.
Into the relationship.
And
was your family aware of what was going on? Do you think at that time, one, the using the drugs, and two, the thing, were you still at home, or like what does that look like?
So it was a really rough kind of patch for me and my family, like because I was, I was running away from home. I just wanted freedom. I was like 15, 16, just being like, just let me be free kind of thing. And, I was, were they aware? I don't think they were aware of the drug use. They definitely weren't aware of the fact that we were using meth. And I do remember the first time he did hit me. I rang one of my best friends, and she actually rang my dad, and my dad showed up to where his place was. And I remember, and this is probably like one of the most heartbreaking memories I've ever got, is the look on my dad's face trying to like get me to go with him. And that should have been a fuck it no more moment, right? But instead of doing that, I told dad that it was okay and I was fine and that he could go, kind of thing. And that's always been like one of those memories that I just like, it kills me.
Why do you think it hurt so much, that one?
Because I'm daddy's little girl, and like,
I can get that.
Your dad's your protector, right? And it also stems into the fact of, it hurt so much because it was me prioritizing someone who I thought loved me over someone who would kill for me. So that it was a conditional love versus unconditional love, and I chose wrong. And
I get that, Angie. Father of 2 daughters and a son, and I'd move heaven and earth for them, but I've also been in the position where sometimes they don't want your help. And it's, as a parent, that can be really hard, like from the parent's point of view. So it starts about 3 months in, and you're with them for 2 years. Take us on the journey, I suppose, where you decide to break away and go out on your own, as it is with the chip on the shoulder. Was that part of the story look like?
So I kind of went on this, when it first started, and then when I was with him, just being around him, and I was just getting introduced to these people and this lifestyle. And, then I was with him while he was doing deals, and I was just getting more and more exposure of, who was filling the zoo, what was going on, what was drug dealing like. We were always using ice. Like, I was introduced to his friends. And, so throughout this process, like, the abuse got worse over time. And, classic manipulation thing is like, it'll see how far we can go at the start, keep going until then, like, you're just he's got his hooks in you so tight that you stay with him through anything, and like there were times when, he nearly burnt a red hot ice pipe against my face and, had me pinned down with like a blowtorch, and like all of this really severe shit that happened. And it was eroding who I was as a person. And my parents raised me to be someone who was very strong-willed and a very confident woman. But back then it broke me, and I had gone through this whole period of just thinking that things are going great, but like slowly my self-image and my self-worth was just going downhill and downhill fast, to the point that, I was accepting this abuse and manipulation as like what I deemed love to be. And then when I finally did get the courage to walk away from him, it was just, there'd been enough times when he was going to do this, going to do that. And I just remember having a moment, and remember having a moment, and, because I know that he still felt like a safe space for me, and I still felt like a safe space for him. There was always that. So even if it was really toxic between us, we still had that kind of thing. And he used to always like ring me up after he'd been on a bender for like days and days and days and needed to sleep. So then like I would be the person that he'd ring, and then he'd like basically just put himself in a coma for 2 days while he'd be like wherever I was. So, and shortly before I did get the courage to leave him, he was on the Auntie's Most Wanted for beating up another girl that he was friends with, who is actually having a full-on relationship with. So, there was all this other shit going on. And I just remember being, I had been on a bender, and he like fucking called me, and I met up with him, and I just remember kind of looking and just seeing this reflection of like, this is what your life is going to look like if you don't walk away from it, And I think that moment it was a fuck it no more moment, because I was just like, this is pathetic, like this is ridiculous, this isn't how I want my life to look, kind of thing. So that was just like that radical point of honesty of being like, okay, nope, we're out.
Time to do something different. Now, unfortunately, I've been around similar type of relationships from a very young age. I've spoken on the podcast before about my father, but I've also had relatives who were in a domestic kind of violence relationship, and they stayed together for 20 odd years, you know. So you getting out in 2.5, 3 is good. And I can understand how that toxic relationship can really drag on, and how you can feel like you know nothing else. What do you think were some of the lowest moments in that time for you? A couple of standout ones where you weren't like, I just can't stay here anymore. You know, you had that one where you realize this is what my life's going to look like for maybe the next 20 years. But what were some of the lowest moments for you at that time?
There's one moment particularly that, you know, still sits with me very, like, in a very uncomfortable manner. And I hardly ever talk about it in all honesty, but I don't really talk about it because it's still one that stings. And it stings so much because it was the moment that one of the moments where I genuinely thought that like this was the end kind of thing. And I remember, you know, he was very calculated with how he would behave, and he was on a, you know, ice-induced psychosis moment, kind of like losing his biscuit, you know, picked me up and he picked me up and drove out like the back of the bush in Darwin, and then, you know, was accusing me of all this crap, and then, you know, beat me with a crowbar, and because I was in the middle of nowhere, like he took my phone off me, and I kind of just run for the hills along this fence line until, you know, he was in pursuit and then caught up to me, and, you know, you can imagine how that played out. And I remember just being kind of pinned down on the floor, looking up and thinking, if this doesn't end here, this scenario needs to end here.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the moment of, and I just remember, and it still sits with me, like that feeling, like from that particular memory. It just,
of course,
it's been one of the most uncomfortable things for me. However, I've learned to take that stomach tying itself and just turn it into, you know, diesel and put
positive energy
on fire. Yeah. So I've learned to channel that, you know, that anger and frustration that I've held on to with it, and turn it into a forgiving energy, but also an energizing energy.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you know what? Fuck you. Like, I'm going to prove to you that, like, even though this was my current reality, at this point, like, this was not going to be the future. And I just remember, you know, going back to getting this like chip on my shoulder with it, because I was like, how many people out there go through something like this? And I was like, how dare you? You know, I always just felt like I've never been the victim. I've never like played the victim card. And it really irks me when people pull the victim things, because like I was a victim and I don't choose to see myself as a victim. I'm a survivor. I just get fuck on with it. And people like, this happened to me. And I'm like, just, you know, reality is shit sometimes. Yeah, reality is just so shit sometimes. And you just got to be like, okay, cool. What's the lesson in this? How do I, you know, redirect those emotions into something productive? And that was something that I've been able to really channel internally, which has been a great strength that I have developed over time. You know, like I sit and I talk about it here, and like I'll talk about Audacity and my brand and everything till the cows come on. But, you know, what you see now, like the woman I am today is not the same girl that was, you know, nearly
it's a
killed
journey to get from that point and use what happened at that point to get to where you are now. And look, that's very much the intention behind the show, is somebody out there will be listening and they may be in a similar moment right now, and for them to understand that, hey, look, this isn't your life. This is just the current moment in your life, and you can choose what happens next, I think is important. Was it long before that moment? It sounds like it was fairly close between that moment and whenever you've decided, okay, I'm going on my own. I'm taking my chip and off I'm going. What does that next part of your journey look like? How long was that, do you think?
I think it might have still been a good few months that I stayed with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and then this is like tying back to what I was saying, when you get that weird comfort with your abuser, that, you know, like you feel safety net with them and stuff. And I remember, you know, there were all these like little moments, and because the way that he was towards me after he'd done something to that extent was great. And I was like,
Totally
this is the man that I fell in love with. Like, oh, idiot, don't be doing that shit. But that's how they get you hooked, right? So, you know, I think it was another couple of months before I actually and I remember being around people, and, you know, then there were like other chicks that he was like, you know, sleeping with, that were trying to be my friend. And there was all this like crap happening. And I was just like, this is what? And I just remember reflecting on it, and it kind of like, that's when the chip really started, because I was like, oh man. And it, you know, I've never been the girl that's followed the norm. So I was watching like all these, you know, and I was witnessing other women who I thought they were my friend, but B, I thought they would be able to see what he was doing to me and, you know, want to see it clear. But instead they were just getting sucked into his charm, just the same way I did. And I think I developed that chip on my shoulder from watching and just witnessing like firsthand him manipulate other people right in front of me. And I was watching him manipulate drug dealers, people that he owed a lot of money to. And I just remember being sat there thinking, you idiots. You idiots, as if you cannot see through this guy's bullshit. And then that was the light bulb moment for me, when it was like, you too are the idiot, miss. Because look at what you've sat through. And when I come to that realization, I was like, oh, damn it. Well, I'm part of the flock.
I think it's important for anybody that might be out there in any type of a toxic relationship to understand that there will be moments where you think, I should have left. And I go back even to my own mother. She should have left for nearly 25 years, so she should have. But hearing your story and being able to go, okay, actually, just because I didn't leave the last time, whenever it sinks in, and everybody usually knows at that point, follow your gut and go with it would be my advice to anybody that's stuck in that type of a relationship. So what comes next? You leave that relationship. It sounds like it wasn't a straight line just up then after that, was it?
No. No. Because I had this massive chip on my shoulder, I was spiteful. I was super spiteful. And I was like, you idiot, I'm going to beat you at your own game. And I was like, you know, because I was smart, and frankly, everyone was always like, oh, Angie, how you doing? You know, I've always had a bubbly personality. I've always got along with a lot of people. So, you know, I leveraged that, and I leveraged that into drug dealing. And then I was drug dealing and very successful at it, just because, you know, for me, it was like clear calculations of like what to do, you know, and because I was young and dumb, I was being an idiot as well, you know. I didn't take anything seriously. You know, there was really dangerous people that I ripped off. I got ripped off. And I was just like, for me, it was just like this weird game that I was playing. It was full of excitement and like cop chases and, you know, like chases from other people. And like, I didn't really understand the danger that I was in. And I think because, you know, I'd had the courage to leave this guy, and I was on this, you know, like this energy of, I'm going to show you who's who. I just felt untouchable. And then I got mixed up with a few people who just randomly got mixed up with one person in particular who was like a very well-known name up here from, you know, like somewhere else. And he kind of took me under his wing. So I felt untouchable because everyone knew where I was getting all my stuff from, and no one would fuck with this guy. Credit to this man, like he was such a beautiful soul despite like everything that he'd kind of gone through with his journey and stuff, you know, like, but he always showed a lot of care for me, and he could see that even though I was young and I was being dumb, he's like, I could still see that within you, Angie, that you're a good kid. And he would tell me that because he was, you know, like mid-40s, and there wasn't any like relationship between us. Like he'd call me kid, and it was kind of like a father-daughter dynamic in this fucking weird world of criminal activity. And he could see that I wasn't the kind of person that could be told. I had to learn. So he's like, all right, instead of, letting you do this the wrong way, he's like, I'll teach you how to do it the right way. So, then like that just positioned me in like this really weird dynamic of like me being the person that all these people were coming to, and I was doing like stupid amounts of stuff that, it was like I was on a movie, fast cars, like all this crap happening, penthouse suites, and I was 17 and I had like endless money and drugs, and I got consumed in that lifestyle of being someone who was important and, in high demand. And, I had this social status with him as well because I was affiliated with this guy. And, it kind of just drove me into like this weird, realm that I was in. And then it was quickly undone when I'd been involved, like, I got pulled up by the cops a few times. And because they were trying to get the fellow that I was working with, if you will, I don't know how you phrase it, they were trying to get through to him, and I couldn't tell you if there was like informants or whatever, like who fucking knows, right? But there was a lot of situations where, I come very close to like getting caught or something would happen, just get out with the end of my teeth, or like I'd get arrested, but I didn't have anything on me. So then I didn't realize that they were building this big case against me, trying to get him. And then when they did finally arrest me, they arrested me for quite a substantial amount of meth and a heap of cash, like all this stuff. Then I remember sitting in the holding cells of the correctional facility in Darwin, and they were trying to get me to rat on this fellow. And like the one thing that you don't do in that lifestyle is like you don't snitch kind of thing. But they had so much evidence against me, and they openly said it. I remember the lead for the TRG at the point, he was like, yeah, like, like we've got you on all of this, like we can drop this, like the classic, give us a name and we'll take it down. But I didn't. And because I was 17 when all of that kind of unfolded, I was very lucky because I was facing, I had over 20 different charges, and a lot of them like really weighty charges.
Yeah.
And I was so lucky that I was 17 because it got all put under like first offences. And, so I went through the whole court process, but because I was underage, I didn't get anywhere near the severity of, say, the likes of my co-offender, who was, above 18 at that point. So,
what was the outcome? What did you end up getting?
I was in like Don Dale for a little bit, not very long, because then I got bailed to rehab, and then I had to spend about 6 months in rehab. Didn't really learn my lesson either because I got kicked out of rehab, and not for doing anything bad or like breaking the any like doing drugs or anything like that. I ended up having a relationship with a guy that was in there who was actually my co-offender who I wasn't allowed to speak to. So, just they put us in the same rehab facility, which was just like one of those things that, the heart wants what it can't have. And like, we were best friends before all of this had happened, So anyway, he got out before I did, and then we wanted to stay in touch. And, when you're in like rehab is a place where there's just a heap of other criminals who escape in jail, essentially. So, and how criminals think and feel, like it is not hard to get whatever you need kind of coordinated. So
wherever you are.
Yeah, I had a phone in rehab, which was the thing that they found, and I got kicked out of it. So
I did wonder where the rehab come into the story, but it sounds like it was part of the sentencing and to get you out of that kind of system. Okay, that makes perfect sense. What age are you whenever you go into the rehab?
17. So I was 17.
17.
So, and I turned 18 after I got out. And, you're meant to be over 18 before they can accept you into a rehab facility, but they made like a special condition for me.
You were a special case.
Yeah, I've always been a special case to my detriment.
Was it like in there at 17 then? Because you're obviously one of the youngest ones in there, I'm guessing, at that point.
I was the youngest.
What
You know what?
does that look like?
It was a weird experience for me because I was so young and I was naive and silly, and I was just this to me. I was like, again, what is this? You know, it hadn't really sunk in what
Yeah.
was going on. You know, like
Yeah.
I didn't fully grasp just exactly what I'd done
Yeah.
and how I ended up in this thing. And I was like, oh yeah, it's just a thing. You know, meanwhile, everyone else my age is in year 12 and they're finishing high school, and I'm like, sentenced to rehab, you know? So just, I had no idea. And I remember being in there and I was like, this is fucking ridiculous. I was like, why do they can't have our rights and all this crap and blah, blah, blah. But it was, you know, it never felt like a real experience until I actually got out of rehab, and when everything kind of come to that, I was like, oh, hang on a second. Now you're 18. You've got core conditions for like curfews and drug tests, and you've got to be sober. You've got to be here. You've got to, and it was my 18th birthday. And, you know, like when you turn 18, it's a big deal. It's like legal age, you can drink. You're meant to have a fucking great party and everything like that. And didn't, you know, and there I was like, had to be at home. My 18th birthday was like a really sorrowsome moment for me because, you know, I was around all the people that loved me the most, that I'd hurt the most throughout that period. So, and it was cringe. I just felt so cringe internally that nothing really come to until the night of my 18th birthday, when I was like, oh, this is kind of right. This is the reality of what I've done. And I could see and feel the hurt and the disappointment of everyone around me, and, you know, particularly trying to tell my parents that it's okay. Like, I'm not going to do it anymore. Like, it's fine. You know, and I'm pretty straight shooter with that. And I always have been. And, you know, on reflection, I'm very much like, oh yeah, like if I say something, I follow through with it. But I think they just, you know, they didn't believe me because I hadn't ever given them any
I can
data.
understand.
Yeah.
I can understand how, you know, if they have seen it over a few year period, then you saying how you're going to change and how it's going to be different would be doubtful for them. In your own mind at that stage, had you already kind of decided that, you know, I'm not going back to that lifestyle, I'm not doing that again? Like, were you genuinely aware of that at that point, or was it something that you were still kind of working through, Angie?
I think up until that point, I was like, yeah, I won't go back into it.
Okay.
And I was kind of, you know, just like that little bit of flakiness on my behalf is what I would call it, you know?
Yeah.
But I was like, yeah, nah, but it could, maybe. You know, I was still dancing around that. Well, the thing is right, you know, like when you become accustomed to, you know, staying in penthouse apartments and having endless amounts of money, and
the lifestyle,
all of these, like, our key social drivers were being fulfilled for me at such a young age, and I seemed to be so important, but it wasn't, you know, and didn't really grasp that. And it wasn't until, you know, like there were a few people from that life that, you know, made sure that I was okay and checked in, like while I was in rehab and everything like that. And, you know, the fellow that I was associated with was one of them who, you know, made sure that when I did get, because he and I fucking remember, like, you know, we ended up, like, we were very close, you know, like I would chat to his family and stuff over the island where he's from, and like all these things. But I remember he would grill me about it and being like, you know, kind of like, don't do what I did, because he spent, you know, like, you know, right before I met him, he'd been in jail for like 8 years, you know, in solitary confinement for a lot of it. So he was like, don't do what I did, kind of thing. And then it, you know, nothing had really hit me or impacted me until it was being around with like the people who were always there, you know, because you have those people that are always there and they will always show up, and just having to confront them and being like sat there going, oh, okay, like I can see and I can feel the hurt and the, you know, these like everyone was just like, oh yeah, you just get that feeling that you're just like, oh, we're here almost, I don't want to say it's like a performative thing, but you can tell that like no one trusted me and what I had to say. Like my word meant nothing, and the impact that had on me was probably the thing that hit me the most, because I am such a straight shooter, and if I say I'm going to do something, I'm proud of myself on being like that. Yeah.
I can tell that being around the family and just the way you've said that, Angie, obviously I work with a lot of people one-on-one, and I hear the way they say things. I can tell that had a real impact on you.
Yeah.
Where do you think that was coming from?
They had always shown me unconditional love, and I had chosen someone who was so awful to me and to them, he tried to fight my family, like stole my mum's car, like did all this crap.
They'd been through a rough time as well.
Yeah. So, they wore the grunt of everything, and I really took them for granted. And that was the thing that has always sat with me wrong, because it's like, oh, how do I can't change that any of that happened. Like now you've got to live with it, right? And how do you live with that when it's like, oh man, it's like they're like my two favorite people now, and it's just like, how do you fucking live with yourself? And like my best friends, like I bashed my best friend because my ex told me that he slept with her when she was getting, like total lie. But I just kept prioritizing this guy. And I just felt like such an idiot, And it was the internal feeling that it was just like, oh man, you are such an idiot.
It definitely seems like that was the moment where you decided things were going to be different moving forward, which is, it's certainly one of them very powerful moments. What does life start looking like then after that? It
was shaky.
Yeah.
It was really shaky. I had to rebuild the trust with everyone. Mum and Dad didn't believe a word I had to say. Mum would openly be telling me, like, she's like, hey, you're just going to run away tonight. Like, we're going to wake up and you're still going to be here, But Dad's a little bit more passive in the sense that he would be thinking it, and you could see it in his face, but he wouldn't say it.
He wouldn't say it.
My mum's pretty direct with stuff. So, trying to rebuild the trust with them, with my friends. And then, I worked in a cafe. So, like, everyone's finishing school, and, like, I was doing an apprenticeship, lost my apprenticeship, lost my job. I didn't finish high school. I had nothing, I went from having like all this money and all this status and social aspect of like this world to being stripped of everything and having absolutely nothing to show except just all this hurt around me. So, it was a big thing to rebuild from. And this is like that little chip on my shoulder was back, but in a different form now, because now it's like, this isn't going to be my defining moment. And I was like, and I just remember always thinking, like, this isn't how the story is going to be. And I've always had a little saying that I say to myself, and I say it to this day, like, my bounce back game is strong as fuck. Like, you cannot deny that with me. No matter what happens, I'll always keep getting back up. And I was just so determined to make sure that I did. I was like, okay, cool. Like, where am I at? What can I do? Just worked in this cafe, this god awful cafe with a boss that wouldn't pay me, just all this ridiculous shit that you're just like, what the fuck is my life transpired into? But then I started studying, and as soon as I put myself in an environment, like I was doing, like, I did a Cert 3 in business, and that academic side of me really come back out. And it was like I got nominated for some awards, and then I got this job, and it was in corporate business, and I had, I was just getting these little data points of people believing in me, and like I wasn't, I was changing things and things were looking up. So I ended up just diving into, my career, and I was so determined. I was just like, I'm going to just fucking completely.
I'm interested to know, had you like a vision of what you wanted your life to look like at that point? Whenever you're going through and you're stuck in that cafe and you're going, okay, this sucks now at the minute, but had you the ability to connect to that point at that stage, what your life looked like? Or was it just, I don't know where I'm going, but I want it to be better? And I've seen two versions over the years.
Yeah, I was in that, I don't know where I'm going, but I know it's not this.
Okay, good. Yeah.
you know, and I didn't have a goal or anything like that. But I read a lot and I was really inspired by people. You know, like there's one quote that's always stuck with me, and it's the people that change the world are the ones crazy enough to think that they can do it.
think
and
you can.
that's always rung true to me, and just that little kind of voice. And I've always had an inkling that I was, you know, I was like, if I've been able to go through that, like I can, what else can I get through kind of thing? And, you know, it wasn't until like later in my life that I was able to start talking about that part. Like, you know, I would never, if you had fucking asked me to do this 5 years ago, I would have been hard no, not happening. But now I can talk about it very openly, and I coach, and I do all the work that I do, and I've left mining, and I've done all of these things purely because I want people to know that if they've gone through that, like it's not the defining thing. And I want to be the catalyst person to show like, hey, if that was me and now look at me, you know, you can't argue with that proof. So
no, it's very true. I think there's something very powerful about being able to see somebody else having already gone through that transformation themselves.
Yeah.
And that is something that, you know, your story is certainly is a loud sign for people out there that going, oh, I'm stuck here. My life's always going to look like that. But tell us a little bit about your role in mining. How did you end up there? And that Feck It No More moment, because I know there's a moment around that space as well for you. Really quickly, talking of positive impacts, if you would really like to make a positive impact in other people's lives, you can do this by sharing the show right now on your feed. For every 5 people you know, there's one person affected by addiction. You sharing this message with that person may make a positive impact on their life. Or share it on your feed. I know what it's like. Sometimes you can't just say to the person, hey, you should check this out. Put it on your social feed and trust that they'll find the message there. And again, thank you for being such a vital part of what we're trying to do here at Feck It No More. Let's get back to the episode.
So I have, and this might sound a bit feministic or a bit of a feminism thing here, but I've always, when men doubt me, it has always given me fuel.
Yeah.
And I know that it stems from this abusive guy that I was dating, right? 100%. Yeah. And, you know, my dad was in mining, and we were always like, you know, like get a good job, you know, build a career, like mining's the way to go, like good money, rah, rah. So that I was like, you know, before I went into mining, I was working 2 jobs. I was studying full time, and I was like doing a lot. And I was like, I'm not even making that much money. And I was like, this is like bullshit money compared to the money that I want to be making, you know? And I was just left, like uprooted everything within about a 2-month period, just uprooted my life in Darwin and moved to Perth.
Yeah.
And dove into the mining realm. And, you know, I went from having a very good corporate business job to then, you know, on the explosives team, blowing things up. And I was like, this isn't what? You know, like what is happening with this? But then when I got fired from my very first mining job, which not from the first one, sorry, the second one, but it was like one of the big companies that I thought I was going to be at. And then it was like, you know, around COVID, and I had, you know, pushed the boundaries of like the isolation procedure because I was really fit, and I was, you know, there's a whole backstory with that. I won't go into it, but I was outside of the little square perimeter that we were allowed. And I got fired for that. So, and then I ended up in another company, and my career just took off, and I just always had that chip on my shoulder of being doubted by men. And then I was in a male dominated industry, and for me, I've always been the person, I'm like, what's my output? What am I producing? And you cannot fucking argue with my work ethic. It's always been a thing. I'm like, no matter what I do it to an excellent standard.
Speak for themselves.
Yeah. So then that's just, you know, that really shone, and I was in the right company, and everyone believed in me. I had good support and good leaders, and then everything kind of took off to the point that, you know, for the last 4 years of my life, I didn't actually apply for jobs. Like I was approached for them, and my career just kind of kept stepping up. Which
the
was
mining industry is an industry where if you have that drive and you have that self-belief, I think that, you know, you can do the job to a high standard, there is lots of opportunities in it. You know, I know people say, oh, especially now at the minute, there's lots of opportunities for female, but there's plenty of opportunities for men as well. It's just there's a lot of people in that industry that seem to just put in the bare minimum just to get through.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're not one of them people. That's probably why you stood out so much in it, I'm guessing.
Yeah, 100%. I've never been a bare minimum person. And you're absolutely correct. You know, like you know that yourself from being one of the leaders, like you don't help someone who's just there to show up, you know, like I'll move heaven and earth. And I have for like team members of mine who had that initiative and had the right attitude. And, you know, you can teach stuff. You can teach technical, you can't teach attitude, or it's really hard rather to teach attitude. But, you know, I've had people that I've like pushed through into like leadership positions and, you know, helps them grow and get into other areas because it's wasted potential. And, you know, guy, girl, they, them, whatever. Yeah. There is always so much opportunity if you are hungry for it.
Yeah, if you're open to it and mindful of it.
Yeah.
So how long are you in mining for?
I was in mining for 5 years.
Okay. Yeah.
In mining for 5 years, and I enjoyed it. It was good. It was good. There were, you know, very cruisy. I'd come from like corporate business working with the government as our client. So you know, like our head office of the company that I was working for before I went into mining was in Boston in the US. So very top tier business standards. Then I come to mining and it was like kafuckery. You're like, what the fuck is this? You know, one of the biggest companies in the world, or some of the biggest companies in the world. And you're like, how is this we're doing what? It was just a bizarre
transition.
Yeah. And it was just, it kind of like hit me that it was just like, oh, okay. So, you know, for me, I was just like, oh, well, clearly you can see the opportunity of things that you could improve. And, you know, that I fell into like business improvement with it. But it, you know, I was in mining and I was hustling, you know, I had the career, I was doing all of the things. I was like, building all the blocks, and I was working on this, you know, trying to get to a point of being happy. I was like always focused on the next thing. That was always something that I was like felt very victim of was like being the person that could never stop and actually give grace to like what I had achieved.
I know that feeling.
Yeah. And I never really felt like, you know, because I'm used to such a good high standards of business, and then like mining is mining, you know exactly what it like, you know what it's like, and you're just like, what the hell? And because I'm such a high achiever naturally with stuff, there was friction with things and like, you know, ways that the companies would run and that I didn't actually align to and that I didn't believe in. One of those things is, as we were talking about before the show, the autonomy and like letting people have a creativity and use their brains and actually foster excellence instead of we're just creating like robots who alone just produce nothing or the bare minimum because like what?
Because that's all we expect of them.
What else are they getting conditioned to do out here except do this, do that, do this, go home? So
I get that. That was one of my big frustrations too. The teams I built over the years, I always put it down to the people in the teams and getting the best out of them people in order to create really good teams. Yet in that industry, sometimes it's just a case of bums on seats used to be one of the phrases that really, really annoyed me. We just need a person in there. And, you know, I think whenever you have to lower your standards to meet the standard, I think that can be a real challenging time for people. And I know it was for me. Your Feck It No More moment in the mining space, what'd that look like?
So it was actually, I kind of got encouraged by the universe with this one. And I use the word encouraged because I got injured. I got injured, and that just completely flipped a switch on my life. You know, I was like shooting for the stars and I had the career, I had all this. I was doing, you know, like everything was going great. And then I got this injury and it left me sat like you know, for a couple of years, and even now, like I still can't got to be careful with like walking and like doing things like it's like permanent injury kind of thing. And I had to sit at home. I wasn't able to work. I couldn't go back to work, and I was trying to go back to work and all these things. So then I had this medical situation go on, and, you know, I wasn't getting supported by the company, and there was like, you know, just friction with things. And because I wasn't able to walk or leave the house or do anything, you know, I kind of had a lot of time to like sit and self-reflect. And, you know, I was thinking and stewing on all these things, reflecting on my past. And I've always wanted to be an author. So, you know, I wrote a book, which I'm in the process of editing at the moment, through, you know, encapsulating all the lessons from this weird period of my life that from when I was younger. And then I was just, you know, it kind of burst me into where I'm at now, and, you know, like starting a company and, you know, just launching a podcast and channeling my energy into my own business and building what my version of success looks like. Because, you know, it was like, okay, do you want to go back into this mining setting where you have, you know, poor leaders, like you're not actually getting cared for by this company, you are just a bum on the seat, you know? And I was a leader in the workplace. So, you know, you have
the
a bit of
leaders are
bias.
just bums on seats too.
Yeah, exactly. But you think like, oh, I must be a little bit more important. Nope. Like, no. So that was like a bit of a, you know, like a shock to the system of being like, oh, okay, like I'm really, like it's not aligning. And I had a lot of time, and I mean a lot of time to like reflect and think and feel on like what I want to do. And, you know, then I had these moments of just opportunities that kind of come up, and then connecting with people and connecting to other business owners and, you know, finding that sense of inner belief. Because, you know, you asked me a question earlier if I had a, you know, a vision for where my life was. And I didn't when I come out of rehab at 18. I had no fucking idea. But then when I first went into mining, and I remember this, and I first went into mining, I remember I would always chant this little thing, or like, you know, when my leaders were like, oh, like, where do you want to go? Like, what does your tree look like? And I was like, CEO by 30. Like, that's what I'm aiming for. At least CEO by 30. And I remember, and I'll never forget this, I remember one of the supervisors for this trainee, that was my first job in mining. He was like, well, you just need to calm down. You just need to calm down, like be a little bit more realistic. And so, you know, at that point, that's where I was clear on like what I was going, and, you know, how I was going to get there. I don't know. But then, you know, kind of just, and I remember, I got I love diving into like the spiritual realm with stuff, but I kind of take it a little bit lightly. But I was having a bit of a troublesome time. So when I moved to Perth, I got this reading gun from this psychic, and she told me that I was going, and I was like asking her about my career and stuff. She said, you're going to go into mining and you're just going to keep going up. So for me, that put this bias in my brain that that's what was going to happen. Right? So then there I am, I'm working away. I'm like, you know, I'm getting headhunted for all these jobs and all these things are happening. And then I get this injury, and it's just like, hang on a second. I thought I was going up here. Where am I going? Like, what's going on?
You didn't mention this injury.
Yeah, no. So I didn't mention any of that. But then I realized that everything has worked out so perfectly for me, despite the fact that I have a permanent impairment in my foot, which is like the most annoying thing in the world. But, you know, everything else that I've been able to do and build on the back end of that has been enormous in my, you know, in my path and in my journey. And now it's like, you know, my brand Audacity has birthed from all of these things. Like, you know,
from
I
having
speak in
that time to sit and reflect and the experiences that you've had over the years.
Yeah, 100%. So, you know, like being able to just sit back and be like, okay, what's going on? And then I've had like, there were a few moments when I was like in business settings and at seminars and things, and I was like, oh, okay, like I'm on the right path. This is where I'm going. And now, you know, like when you start working on something, and you've probably felt the same, when you start working on something and there's no friction, like even though there's friction, but it's like a fun friction. It's just like whether it like be podcast hurdles or, you know, like things happening and you're just like, I'm totally fine with this. This isn't bad friction. You know,
it's
and
interesting. I used to think I worked a lot in my last role as an executive. And I was working 14, 15-hour days, maybe even longer. And it felt like work every day. So it did. And over the kind of 10-year period, that I was in the mining space and in that leadership space, I used to have this little voice in my head saying, I quit. And it would just pop up random, like over the space of years internally. Now, I'm not somebody that's a quitter by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
I've went on, I've run 200 miles and do endurance events, and quitting is something that has always, I suppose, subconsciously is something that I never wanted to do. But I always, like, randomly every few months or every 6 months or so often, I would just get this little voice in the head going, fuck, I quit. And it was something, I think it probably kept me in the job longer than I intended to be in it, because I refused to quit. And like you, I had set a target to say, I want to get to the top. And, whenever I set a target, I like pushing through and following through it. But somewhere along the line, I realized the target I'd set for myself wasn't aligning with what I really wanted out of life.
Yeah.
And I had to go, shit, now I have to stop and think and set a new target. And I mentioned to you, that for me came with whenever Jean told me I had only 6 months to live. And I was like, you know what, life's too short. I'm not waiting any longer. And I did. I followed through with them words. I quit. But them words might have been there for 7, 8, 9 years at a time, just randomly popping in. And I do believe it's the universe's way of telling you you're not on the right path. There's something else you should be doing, because even though I work more hours now, it doesn't feel like work. Like I never switch off. Everything I do is focused about, okay, how can I provide more? How can I help more to my clients and the people I work with at the moment? So that never really switches off. So I'm still doing the 15, 16, 17-hour days, but it doesn't feel like work in the slightest. I enjoy every moment. Are you finding something similar yourself?
It's play. It's total play. You tell me about, we're building this business, we're doing this partnership, we're creating this thing, like, hey, you want to build confidence? Like, what's your leadership like? Like, all of that for me, I am immersed in play. You want me to do a heap of editing? Fuck yeah, I'll do a heap of editing. You want me to sit at my computer for 16 hours and do nothing but what I've got going on? Absolutely. I love it. And, that not switching off, I understand. I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with it. Like, the mission to me, until the mission will never be accomplished, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, we have one life. We have one go to achieve everything that we want, and for me, my dad got diagnosed with terminal cancer, and that's been like a big thing for me, just to be like, oh, are we, like, what are you striving for, Ange? Like, what are you delivering? Are you working in alignment with like what you truly want? Like, are you having the impact that you're having? Like, I was leading people, but I didn't give a shit about what we were doing. I was like, for me, I was like, we're mining, we're digging dirt, we're not changing lives. And I would tell my team that, like, we're not changing lives.
Yeah.
And now I get to change lives, So for me, that just sparks my whole thing. Similar to you get these little nudges of encouragement from the universe to be like, hey, what are you doing with this? You should be doing this. And sometimes, if you don't actually listen to it the first time, it's going to get delivered in a different way, or it's going to get delivered in a way that's going to put you, it's going to hurt sometimes. Yeah. But then that's what triggers those fuck it no more moments, when you take the hint and you're like, okay, I hear you. I'm taking it on board. And, I love the saying, like, you've got to go all in. And, you quitting.
Burn the boats.
Yep. And you do. Burn the bridges. Just make it no way to go back. Like, and it triggers something in you when you do that. And it's the most, like, it's, how do I describe it? You feel pulled towards something in a very freeing manner, almost like, this is going to sound a little bit woo, but like your soul is just being like, you're on the right path. Like, you kind of just,
I get it.
You're getting pulled to the thing, and it's so,
I totally get it.
Yeah, it's mesmerizing. That's why, like when you reached out for me to come on the show, I was like, fucking done. Let's do it. Like, I love it. It was like, I got your vibe straight away. First message, I was like,
What do you think it is, Angie? Why do you think we do what we do? Because you could be making more money, I'm guessing, in mining at this stage. I know I certainly could be. I know I certainly was. But why is it that we do what we do you think? What is it for you? What's the drive to build Audacity into the brand that, well, I know it will become, and I'm glad to be seeing it in the growth stage. What's the driver? Why do you do it?
The thing that drives me is knowing that someone's life has gotten better from having an interaction with me or my brand or someone who's going to work for me one day. If I change one life, I'm happy.
Yeah.
You know?
I get that. I definitely get that. It's certainly the reason I do it. And I think if I look at that and I ask you at a deeper level, you might say you get this. But I suppose whenever I look back at the person I used to be and the negative thoughts, the negative stories, the limiting beliefs that I had, maybe even the closed mindset that I had, how that held me in a place where I wasn't happy for so long. And the transformation of my life to where I've been able to get to today is two extremes that I'd never thought possible. If I can give one person that same feeling, that same experience, I know that I'm done everything that I can. That for me, I think it's the knowing that the impact that it's had on my life, having a different mindset and having a different approach. If we can just give a little glimpse of that to other people, I think is a very special thing. Tell me more about your brand and where people can find you and how they get in touch with you.
So they can find me on, if we look just at the podcast, Entrepreneur Audacity, they can find the podcast is on all major platforms, the website, YouTube, all of the things. For me specifically, Angie Verzeletti, all of the social channels, Insta. I now have a TikTok account. I've got my website. There'll be a book coming out at some stage. The Audacity brand, that's Audacity Health, and it is in the early stages of building. So I'm excited to see where that empire goes. And I'm excited that the brand is Audacity, and tying back to what you just said, Glenn, that beautiful comment of just helping one person. If I can have that, just one thing, but I want to help many, which is why I do everything that I do. And you're the same in the sense that I don't mind being a person that faces the grunt of hate from people to show other people what's possible, because you get a lot of lashback and a lot of hate when you can stand up and talk about what we do, but someone's got to do it.
Audacity, tell me more about what that means to you, because I really like the meaning behind it and the intent behind it, but I want to hear it from you. Why Audacity?
You know what? I'm actually so excited that you just asked me that, because this is a question I ask all my guests on the show, and I love hearing the answer. But for me, what does Audacity mean? It's, if I was to put it in an image, you're in the back of a truck, or not a truck, a ute, whatever. I'm from Darwin, so let's go ute, an old shitty ute that's out in the bush, driving along the Queen's Road with double fingers up at everyone, being like, I'm on my path. I'm doing exactly what I've been put on this earth to do. And I'm unapologetic about it. And I'm just going for it. And it's been audacious, not caring about what other people think, feel, and the right people. Like, if they're on board with you, they're going to climb in the back of that truck. That ute's going to get probably pretty full pretty quick. But, they'll get on board, and then you fucking keep going. So, and that's the whole brand. Yeah.
I really love it. But that one sentence that you said about not caring what other people thinks, and if nobody takes anything else away from today, just that one sentence in itself is such a powerful sentence, because whenever you're free from limitations of what other people think, you can really start focusing on what you want to do and what you can achieve. So I love it, and I wish you all the success with it, Angie. I really, truly do. One message to leave for our listeners. What is it?
The one message: dive into it. Have audacity and just stop at absolutely nothing until you're happy in your life. That's what I would be business.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Angie, thank you so much for your time today.
And thank you.
And now for the legal stuff. I am just some guy who has worked very hard on himself to get him from where he wasn't happy to a place where he is supremely happy, with the transformation of thinking he couldn't do everything to now believes that he can do anything. That was a long journey for me. Along that journey, I've spent 30 years of finding what's the best way to change our mindsets, to get us to a better place. I've completed a results coaching course, which enables me to coach others, which is something I've been doing for the last 5 years. And with my work with individuals, leaders, and businesses, I get to see the challenges that people are facing every day. So if you're in need of some support and help, please seek professional advice or reach out to us at Feck It No More or SPC Success, and we'll certainly be able to point you in the right direction. Thanks for watching today's episode.